Welcome to On the Moneyline, a podcast by MMA Play 365. I'm Newsome, and I'm here to break down this weekend's card, which is UFC Vegas 52, which is headlined by Amanda Lemos versus Jessica Andrade. Just before we get into the breakdowns, though, as always, I will be recapping the last event at UFC Vegas 51 from the Base AI perspective, which is our UFC prediction software from MMA Play 365. That'll be a separate video on our YouTube channel in its own Base AI playlist, so don't forget to check that out. But we get straight into the breakdowns now, straight into the main event, and it's Amanda Lemos versus Jessica Andrade. Now, this is a fight that I think, a lot of people, myself included, it raised a few eyebrows when we found out that this was main eventing a UFC fight night. But after watching tape and looking into the fight, I completely understand why the UFC have made this fight. It's going to be a violent and vicious fight. Amanda Lemos is a powerful striker, powerful combinations. She loves to be aggressive, get in the face of her opponents. And overall, her game's just really aggressive. And the one thing that I love from Amanda Lemos is when things get a little bit heated in the pocket in boxing range, she just loves to let go of combinations and she'll throw powerful hooks inside of boxing range. She's a vicious fighter. And this is why the fight's going to be interesting, because we all know who Jessica Andrade is. Jessica Andrade is an absolute bulldog. She's a powerhouse inside of boxing range herself. Big hooks, big combinations, big power from a left hand, a right hand. She'll also mix in takedowns as well, so she'll level change against the cage. She'll pick her opponents up, she'll slam them. She won the UFC championship against Rosa Namajunas with a slam, knocking Namajunas out with that slam. So she's just an ultimate powerhouse herself, and this is why I think this fight is going to be violent. I think it's going to be exciting. The one issue I have with Lemos, and I said this before the Angela Hill fight, I felt like that Angela Hill fight was a big step up in competition because Lemos had not fought anybody at the top of the division with that type of skill set. And I think she started well, obviously, against Angela Hill, but I don't think she even won that fight, if I'm being honest. I rewatched the fight a couple of times. Obviously, I scored it for Angela Hill live as well. I don't think Lemos won the fight. It was close, but I think that step up in competition really showed that there is a ceiling that isn't too far away from Amanda Lemos. And I think against Jessica Andrade, as fun and as exciting as this fight is going to be, I think that Andrade is just a better quality fighter that's fought the who's who in the division, who's fought the best of the best. And I think that that's going to show on the night. Now, the one thing that I will say, and this is a cause for concern from the Jessica Andrade side, is that, like I said, this fight's going to be violent. There's going to be a lot of moments inside of boxing range where they're exchanging heavy punches and they're throwing down and they're landing hard, clean and flush on each other. So that's just going to give Amanda Lemos every opportunity to try and put Jessica Andrade out. But listen, that's a difficult task. I think that Andrade is going to absolutely thrive off this firefight, whereas I actually think with Lemos, it might be a bit of an eye-opener for her, something that she's not used to, because she's used to normally being the fighter that is the aggressive fighter, that is the fighter in your face, that's throwing the hard combinations, that's dropping their opponent. But now she's fighting somebody in Andrade that matches that and betters that, in my opinion. And I think that Lemos isn't going to like that, whereas Andrade is going to thrive on it. Along with that, I think that Jessica Andrade, couple of paths to victory. Like I said, she's got the path in regards to the boxing, inside of boxing range, but then she can also level change, and a wrestling game's good, a jiu-jitsu game's really underrated, so she's got a path to victory there as well. And all that being said, the level of competition, the amount of top quality fighters that Andrade fought over the years, I think all that combined together is going to get her over the line. So I'm picking Jessica Andrade to win this fight. And in the next fight, in the co-main event, we've got Guida versus Claudio Puelles. Again, I think it's going to be a really interesting fight. Guida, 40 years old, he's still going relatively strong. Obviously, he is going to be a finished product now in regards to a fighter. We're not going to see too many developments from him, if any developments at all. And we're also not going to see any show-stopping performances either in regards to Guida just coming in there, lighting up the cage and surprising everybody. You know what you're going to get with Guida. Crazy movement, in and out of range, lateral movement, no real pattern or rhythm to what he does. He's just a madman inside there. He's not technical. He's very unorthodox. And his striking, again, you can say the same thing. It's not too technical. It is very unorthodox. He tries to strike at weird angles. But ultimately, with Guida, is he will get off on strikes, but his volume's just not there. And I know when you look at the numbers, you'll say that, Claudio Puelles' numbers aren't there either in regards to his volume. But when you Guida and you've had over 30 UFC fights and you're still only landing around 2.5 strikes on average per minute, it's a really, really low number. And then on the other side, you've got Claudio Puelles. He's a young fighter. He's still developing in his game. He took a couple of years off not so long ago to develop his game, and he come back a better fighter. He's now training at Sanford MMA, so he's striking something that you can notice getting better. He was never too comfortable or relaxed striking before, but those are two adjectives that you can definitely describe Puelles is striking with. Like I said, he is calm, he is composed, he is relaxed, he is more patient, and he's clean and crisp as well, mixing his punches with his kicks. So his striking game is developing. But Puelles is a good grappler, and I think this fight is actually going to come down to who wins the wrestling exchanges, because I think Puelles is going to be the better grappler or more of a threat grappling. Guida, he's got 21 losses on his MMA record, and 10 of those have come by submission, so he's been submitted a lot. I think that's definitely something that Puelles should be and probably is going to be looking at. But the thing is, I think Guida's the slightly better wrestler here, so I'm really interested to see if Puelles can get the fight to the mat. I do think that Puelles has got a good single leg takedown. I think once the transition starts, he can cause scrambles. And the one thing that I love about Puelles and his grappling is his positioning. His positioning is world class. He gets into a position where he's comfortable and a position where his opponents can't escape too easily from. And I think if he can do that against Clay Guida and get Guida settled on the mat, I think he's got every opportunity of at least controlling Guida, if not submitting him. But like I said, Guida is going to be tricky here. The wrestling is going to be there for Guida defensively, so Puelles has got to be on his game for sure. But if Puelles can't get him down and we're looking at the striking, I actually think that Puelles is going to have difficulties initially in this fight. But I think once his reads are in and he's settled into this fight, I think Puelles' striking is actually cleaner and crisper, and I think he can cause Clay Guida problems from the outside, being the taller, longer fighter as well. So I think it could potentially be a close fight. The wrestling is going to be super interesting, like I've already mentioned for sure, but I do like Puelles' grappling, and I also like the striking improvements from Puelles as well. So for those reasons, I'm picking Claudio Puelles to win this fight. And then in the next fight, stylistic clash, we've got Maycee Barber versus Montana De La Rosa. Montana De La Rosa is more of a predominant grappler, wrestler. She'll look to get the fighters down to the mat. Unless her opponent, she can match her strike for strike with her boxing. Her boxing has improved, I do think, though, that Maycee Barber, with her being a striker herself, very aggressive. Listen, both fighters are well-rounded here, but I do think that Maycee Barber is going to be, like I said, more aggressive in the face of her opponent, trying to land hard shots, trying to knock her opponent out. I think Montana De La Rosa is hittable. I do think if she does stand with Maycee Barber in this fight, I think she's going to get cracked, she's going to get caught, and I do think that she could potentially get hurt as well. So I do think even if Montana De La Rosa comes into this fight with a game plan of let's strike and see how it goes, I think that that's a very dangerous game plan to come in with. But I think if she does, it won't be long before she reverts back to, no, I need to wrestle, I need to grapple. And I do think that Maycee Barber can be got at. But again, I think when you're looking at the gap in skill here, I think the bigger gap in skills on the feet, striking. I think with Montana De La Rosa, yes, she would be able to take Maycee Barber down, but I don't think it's going to be easy. And if she does get her down, I think Barber could potentially get back up to her feet a couple of times. I feel like it's going to be one of these fights with a stylistic clash where both gapping skills are very similar. I think the bigger gapping skill is slightly edged towards Maycee Barber on the feet, and it's probably going to be one of those fights where Montana De La Rosa does have success wrestling, grappling in one of the rounds, but Maycee Barber is going to do more with her striking and her volume and the damage in a couple of the rounds. A close fight, but I think Maycee Barber does edge it with the gapping skill in the striking, so I'm picking Maycee Barber to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Sumudaerji versus Manel Kape, and I think this is a phenomenal fight, and it's one of my favourite fights on the entire card. Manel Kape, he has looked better since his opening two losses against Pantoja and Nicolau, two fights that I did bet against him, as Manel Kape was the favourite in both of those fights. So Sumudaerji, though, is a completely different fighter to your O'Day Osborns of the world, I think that Sumudaerji's movement is good. I think his length and his range is good. His volume's good. He'll constantly be trying to find nice angles and firing hard combinations straight down the pipe as well. And I just think that Sumudaerji, overall as a fighter, is just a really difficult fighter to deal with. And like I said, although he's not fought the strongest level of competition, you can see the natural skills in his game. He was training at Uriah Faber at Team Alpha Male, but now he's over at American Top Team as well, so I feel that he's probably adding new layers to his game as well. He's probably stepping up and developing also. But I actually think that Sumudaerji he's got a good fight ahead of him here. I don't think it's going to be easy. I definitely think he's got to mind his P's and Q's because Manel Kape can crack and he has got power behind his strikes. And if anyone's going to wrestle here, it is probably more likely going to be Manel Kape. But I do think we've got a striking affair. But I think with the range and the angles that Sumudaerji takes, the volume that he throws and his ability to just keep on his bike and move and be elusive and evasive as well, I think that Manel Kape's going to end up getting frustrated. I think that the fight is going to be close at points in this fight, but I think that Sumudaerji here, I think he's going to land more volume. I think he's going to land the power strikes. We have seen Manel Kape stung as well and hurt, and like I said, there's every chance of Manel Kape coming into this fight and landing something on Sumudaerji and knocking him out. He's got the power to do that, and I think that if it's not going Manel Kape's way on the feet, which I don't think it will, I think Manel Kape is the more likely fighter to start wrestling and grappling, and that is a slight concern for Sumudaerji because Manel Kape's BJJ and his grappling isn't that bad. And we have seen Sumudaerji submitted by Louis Smolka, but Sumudaerji was very tricky to deal with and hold down on the mat in that fight with Louis Smolka. So I wouldn't say that Sumudaerji is completely a fish out of water on the mat. I do think that the majority of this fight and the better work in this fight happens in the striking department, on the feet. And I feel that Sumudaerji is at least going to match Manel Kape. I think the volume's going to be there. He's got power, he's got combinations, he's got speed, he's got movement. I think that's going to be enough to take Sumudaerji over the line. And like I said, I've got a funny feeling from the masses this might be an unpopular pick, but I am picking Sumudaerji to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Charles Jourdain versus Landa Vannata. In the featherweight division, Landa Vannata, he's comfortable now at featherweight, it seems. He made featherweight with no problem against Marc-Andre. And I actually think he looks slightly better at featherweight as well. You know, cutting that excess weight, being a little bit quicker, a little bit leaner, throwing more combinations. The thing is with Charles Jourdain, though, he's such a difficult fighter to deal with. And when he has a good quality opponent in front of him, he does seem to step up. And it's really weird with Jourdain. It's almost like he fights to his opponent's level at times because he has had sketchy fights. He's a little bit inconsistent with his performances. But like I said, when he gets that step up and people are saying, oh, you know, this could be too much of a step up for Jourdain with how he looked in his last fight, he comes out there and he absolutely smashes his opponent. What he did to Andre Ewell was disgusting in regards to a solid, good performance. Absolutely lit Andre Ewell up. And Andre Ewell's one of the quicker fighters in the division, really quick, really slick with his striking, and Jourdain was faster. And I think this is a real key thing in this fight because although Landa Vannata is a dynamic striker, he's a varied striker as well. The same things can be said with Jourdain. I do think that Jourdain's going to have a speed and movement advantage over Vannata, which in a fight that's more than likely going to play out on the feet with both strikers being dynamic and, like I said, varied with their attacks, mixing with the punches and kicks. I think that's a real advantage for Charles Jourdain in this fight. If we get the same Charles Jourdain as what we got in the Andre Ewell fight, who's switching stances, and by the way, he throws naturally from both stances, both southpaw and orthodox as well. I think that's another massive part of Charles Jourdain's game, to really throw his opponents off and mix things up. I like what I see from Charles Jourdain. I think he's fought against good quality opponents and looked great even in losses against the better quality opponents as well. I think he's got a varied game, a dynamic game. The fact he can switch stances comfortably and will do so regularly and fire from both stances. I think that Landa Vannata has got a puncher's chance in this fight. I'm not saying that's his only chance. He could potentially outvolume Jourdain over a 3-round decision, but if it does go to the scorecards, I feel like Jourdain's just going to have done slightly more throughout the fight. Landa Vannata can crack. He could definitely put Jourdain out. I don't think it's a very high percentage outcome, though. And the one thing I do worry from Landa Vannata's perspective is the fact that he's getting on in his career now. He's now cutting a little bit more weight. What's his durability going to look like coming against a fighter who can crack hard? Those are question marks. Like I said, I feel like the overall game of Jourdain, the dynamic varied striking, along with power and the movement and the speed that he showed against Andre Ewell is going to be enough to take him over the line here. So I'm picking Charles Jourdain to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Jourdain Wright versus the fighter fighting on short notice, Marc-Andre Barriault. Like I said, Barriault's taking this fight on short notice, stepping up to replace Roman Kopylov. I liked Roman Kopylov, in that spot against Jourdain Wright. And to be honest with you, I like Barriault as well. I'm not huge on Jourdain Wright as a fighter. I think he is a UFC caliber fighter, maybe just, but his ceiling isn't too high. And I think he's a fighter that is probably going to be around for a couple of years, maybe, but I don't think he's really going to advance in the UFC. He's a fighter that mixes between this karate stance and boxing stance, but ultimately, to be fair to Jourdain Wright, he can crack, he has got power, he has got knockout power, he can hurt his opponents. So that is definitely something that Barriault's got to watch out for, especially after getting starched in his last fight. So Barriault's got to be careful coming in here. He's got to be mindful that he doesn't get starched again. Otherwise, there'll be question marks on his durability going forward. But outside of Barriault's last knockout loss, last time out, very early on, Barriault's known to be a durable fighter, a tough, gritty fighter that'll get into the clinch positions, dirty box with uppercuts, with elbows, with knees to the body as well. And I think that Jourdain Wright's going to have a window of opportunity here, but it's very early on, because if he doesn't crack Barriault whilst they're out in space, once Barriault closes the distance and starts grinding Jourdain Wright against the cage, that's where the energy is going to start being zapped from Jourdain Wright. That's when Jourdain Wright is going to start looking a little bit tired. That's when Barriault is going to absolutely thrive. So I do feel that Marc-Andre Barriault, he's got to be careful in the early moments whilst they're out in space, because Jourdain Wright is light on his feet, and like I said, he can crack. But outside of that, I think Barriault's the better mixed martial artist. I think he's the better overall striker. I think he's better at more ranges inside the clinch positions, inside boxing range. Out at range might favour Jourdain Wright slightly, but I don't think that Barriault's going to allow Wright to just sit on the outside, especially in a smaller cage. I think Barriault, like I said, he survives the opening exchanges in this fight. He gets close, he starts grinding Jourdain Wright, starts wearing him down, tiring him out, emptying the gas tank, and I think that from there Barriault could potentially find a late finish, or he could just cruise to a 3-round decision. So I'm picking Marc-Andre Barriault to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Dwight Grant versus Sergey Khandozhko. And it's going to be a striking battle, in my opinion. Even though Khandozhko is Russian, he does prefer to strike. Dwight Grant's absolutely a striker himself. And I think that Khandozhko's cardio is in question here, because especially in the fight against Rostam Akman, in a fight that, you know, Akman did put a little bit of wrestling pressure on him, and that maybe did tire him a little bit, but did take place on the feet in that fight. So the fact that Khandozhko tires is definitely something of concern here. Obviously, when he fought Rustam Khabilov, I thought the cardio looked a little bit better. Rustam Khabilov did put that pressure, that wrestling pressure on him. Khandozhko was the better striker, but a lot of fighters were against Rustam Khabilov. It's Khabilov's wrestling that normally got him over the line in those fights. But here with Dwight Grant, I think Dwight Grant's got decent takedown defense. We have seen him taken down, but when he is taken down, he can get back up to his feet. But Dwight Grant, I think, doesn't get the credit he deserves. Like going to a close decision with Francisco Trinaldo, a fight that I think he should have won, especially with that point deduction. So Dwight Grant against someone like Francisco is a step down in competition for him against someone like Sergey Khandozhko. Although Khandozhko is dynamic and he's got spin attacks, Dwight Grant's so efficient with his striking, his explosive throwing punches straight down the middle. He's got power. There's not many fighters that have knocked Daniel Rodriguez down and nearly finished Daniel Rodriguez. So the power that Dwight Grant's got is scary. It's explosive. He's dealt with wrestlers and grapplers before as well. And like I said, last time out, he's dealt with an experienced kickboxer in Francisco Trinaldo and went to a close fight with him. Francisco Trinaldo is a better technical striker, a striker with more power than Sergey Khandozhko. So like I said, I think this is a slight step down in competition for Grant. If it goes to a decision, it could be another one of those close decisions because of Khandozhko's point fighting style, the fact that he will just remain slightly more active than Grant. But if Grant's landing the hard, big action shots and dropping Khandozhko, which we have seen Khandozhko hurt against Akman as well, then that's going to look great for Dwight Grant over a 3-round fight also. So I think Dwight Grant's got the finishing upside. I think if it goes to a decision, it could be close, but the big action strikes are always going to look great in the judges' eyes. I'm picking Dwight Grant to win this fight. And in the next fight, a fighter we've not seen in 4 years. I used to really like this fighter, riddled with injuries, but now he's back. We've got Tyson Pedro versus Ike Villanueva. And I think this is a great fight for Tyson Pedro. I think the UFC have thrown Tyson Pedro a bit of a bone, maybe just to get him back into the swing of things in the UFC. Obviously, you know, Ike Villanueva can crack, so Pedro's got to be careful. You know, it's not an absolute gimme fight. No fight is really in the UFC. But I do think that Tyson Pedro is the better striker. He's got more volume, at least from what we saw before the injuries. And the thing is, with Tyson Pedro, he's quite young as well, especially when, you know, 4 years ago, before he got the injuries. So the developments that he could have made that we don't know about is an unknown, but it could only be a positive unknown. I don't think he'll have declined at all. I think he'll have only got better or remained the same at least. So Tyson Pedro, I think he's the better striker, he's the better wrestler, he's got a dangerous submission game. I think Ike Villanueva is going to be game for a certain amount of time until Pedro finds his feet and finds his rhythm and gets back into the swing of things. And actually, that's where Ike Villanueva's got to really capitalise on this fight. In the early moments where there could be potential ring rust for Tyson Pedro, maybe some nerves, maybe some jitters, getting back into the cage for the first time and feeling everything out, that is where Ike Villanueva's really got to put it on Pedro and try and get at him and knock him out. But ultimately, I think Pedro's going to have too much right Villanueva. I think Pedro might also be aware that he might have to weather a storm in the early rounds, whilst Villanueva's trying to capitalise on what could potentially be, like I said, some ring rust for Pedro. I think he weathers any sort of storm. I think Pedro, like I said, is the better striker, wrestler, grappler. I think eventually he finds something along the way, potentially late first round, maybe in the second round. I don't see this fight going to a decision. I think Pedro's going to be able to get Villanueva out of there. How long that takes him is a little bit of an unknown, but I am picking Tyson Pedro to win this fight. And in the next fight, this is another fight that's going to be explosive. We've got Aoriqileng versus Cameron Else. Now, Cameron Else back in the UFC for his second fight. He's a fighter, he's one of those fighters, and I think I said this last time I broke his fight down, that's got a bit of a sketchy record in regards to the level of competition that he's fought outside of the UFC. He hasn't really fought anybody of substance. The UFC like him though, and I understand why the UFC actually like him, even though his record is, like I say, really hit and miss from his opponent's records perspective. But he's a very fun fighter. He'll be in your face. He's wild. He's explosive. He won't back down from a fight. He's the type of fighter that won't say no to a fight, and he entertains the fans. You know, give him a fight that his opponent wants to keep the fight on the feet and bang with him, and he's going to be super fun to watch. And that's exactly what the UFC have done here. Aoriqileng, yes, he will have some wrestling chops to him. Yes, he will have some grappling chops. But ultimately, Aoriqileng is, again, a fighter that likes to be in your face. He's aggressive. He's got power. He likes to throw combinations. He's down for a war. He's down to bang. And this fight's going to be super fun. I think it's a sneaky fight for fight of the night potential. And I think both fighters are going to go at it. But I think Aoriqileng's just got slightly more than Cameron Else, in my opinion. I think he's the fighter that is going to land more combinations inside the pocket. I think he's got more power than Cameron Else. And I think his durability is going to stand up a little bit more than Cameron Else. But that's not to say Cameron Else is a million miles away from him. I don't think he is. I actually think the betting line's a little bit too wide here. But Aoriqileng, for me, has just got more in the tank. And like I said, he's just more game for a war. And I think at some point, one of these fighters is going to drop. They might both potentially drop at times. But I think Aoriqileng is just going to land the cleaner, the harder strikes, and just be more of a problem for Else than Else is for him. And for those reasons, I'm picking Aoriqileng to win this fight. In the next fight, we've got Marcin Prachnio versus Philipe Lins. Philipe Lins stepping down in weight class. It's going to be really interesting to see what he looks like down at light heavyweight. I think that Philipe Lins had a lot of question marks on him at heavyweight. He wasn't that active. He came in with a bit of hype from the PFL, but didn't really do anything of substance. He didn't really light his opponents up or put a clinic on anybody. And I think those are the things that some people, including myself, were expecting from him. So I don't know whether Philipe Lins was just carrying more weight than what he should have done. You know, you look at someone like Jared Cannonier, he wasn't that great at heavyweight, he wasn't that great at light heavyweight, but at middleweight is a monster. So we can see these big improvements from fighters by, you know, going into a different weight class. And that could be the case for Philipe Lins. He might be a lot lighter, a lot leaner, he might be quicker on his feet. And he's always been a decent technical striker with a good all-round game as well. So if he can be, like I said, lighter and quicker movement with more volume, I think that he could cause Prachnio massive problems. Prachnio's a favourite in this fight, and I think it's a bit of a risk because Prachnio, he's not a fighter that's going to light up the cage. He's a fighter that will have the odd good performance here and there, but ultimately, you know, Kyle Kushin, karate background, and he will land some nice strikes, but defensively he leaves himself so open. He can be cracked, he can be got at, and again, that's another worry for him against Philipe Lins, because Lins is going to carry some of that power down from heavyweight in this fight. So if he cracks Prachnio with a clean flush shot that Prachnio's just not defending against properly, then Lins is going to have opportunities in this fight. Listen, it's really difficult to be completely certain and give an accurate prediction for this fight because the unknowns of Philipe Lins dropping down in weight is definitely, like I said, a big factor in this fight and definitely something that you should question. But I am actually going to take that side of the underdog because Philipe Lins is an underdog. Marcin Prachnio, I don't think he should be a favourite against too many fighters in the UFC. Again, no disrespect to Prachnio. It's just I don't think his ceiling's that high. And like I said, he's defensively flawed and he can be cracked and got at. And I think those could be a couple of good things that Philipe Lins can take advantage of in this fight. I think the UFC have probably matched this fight well, knowing that Philipe Lins isn't going to be in there against a beast at light heavyweight that's just going to roll through him whilst he's trying to adjust to a new weight division. So I am actually going to side with the underdog. I'm picking Philipe Lins to win this fight. And in the final breakdown of this podcast, we've got Dean Barry versus Mike Jackson. And I try and remain positive and, you know, I try and give props wherever I can to fights and fighters and the matchmaking, but honestly, I just don't agree with this fight at all in the UFC. Dean Barry, 4-1, you know, the UFC does sign 4-1s, 5-1s, 3-0s to the UFC. But when you look at the fighters that Dean Barry's been fighting, his last win was against a fighter who was 6-30. He's had 2 wins against 2 guys that were 1-1. His loss was against a fighter that was 2-5. So, you know, in the regional scene in the UK and Ireland, there is a big problem of fights being matched well, but then one of the big ticket sellers' opponents pulling out, and the promotions, to make money, they've got to keep that fight on there, and they just get whoever they can to fill that in because of the ticket sales, and money's really tight. And you know, that is one of the issues, and I do get it, but when you've got that sort of record and the UFC are signing you, I just don't completely agree with it. Now, the one thing that I will say about Barry is he does have a karate background, a point-scoring karate background. He did, I believe, help GSP prepare for his fight against Michael Bisping at TriStar, so he has been around good fighters. He does have a martial arts background. It's just the background, the record in MMA is something that I would have liked to have seen him tested outside the UFC, but with that being said, I don't even think he's going to get tested in this fight that much inside the UFC. Mike Jackson, 0-1. So this is the thing, the 4-1 that I've just spoke about with Barry, the 0-1 with Mike Jackson. Now, you could argue that he is 1-1 because he did have a fight result overturned due to testing positive for cannabis, which isn't even a thing right now, and it was always a bullshit thing anyway. But even that one loss, if you're giving that to Mike Jackson, was against CM Punk, and, you know, I don't even need to digress with, I don't even need to elaborate with that. So it's just a fight that I think is very strange. I don't think it should be a UFC fight, is what I'm trying to say, and that's just my honest opinion. I don't mean any disrespect to any of the fighters, but I feel that there's better fighters out there more deserving of a UFC spot than I think it's a bit harsh maybe saying Barry, but definitely Mike Jackson. Either way, Barry's a minus 1100 favourite for a reason. I do think he's going to light up Jackson. We haven't seen Jackson since that CM Punk fight, but Barry's the fighter with real martial arts experience and has been doing it for a very long time. He's going to be able to outstrike Jackson from a technical perspective, or I do think he's going to be able to put the pressure on him, be aggressive, land something hard and knock him out. He has got power, Barry, so I do think that Jackson is going to get put away at some point. It's just how quickly he gets put away. I think it could potentially be early in the first round. I think it's not only a fight that, like I've already said, I don't completely agree with, but it's also a massive mismatch from that perspective because the gap in skill on the feet is huge, and I don't think that Mike Jackson is going to be able to get the fight down to the ground, and if he can, I don't think he's going to be able to just hold Barry and nullify him. Barry will be back up to his feet and striking, if a takedown does happen from Mike Jackson. So, like I said, I don't agree with this fight. I think it's, 2 records that could definitely be better for sure for a UFC fight, and it's also a massive mismatch as well. But from a pick perspective, I'm picking Dean Barry to win this fight. And that's all for this episode of On the Moneyline. I hope you all enjoyed it as always, guys. I really like the comments, talking about fights. It is me that is in the reply to the comments as well. So anybody that wants to chat about any fights, drop a comment in there. We can have a conversation. Tell me your bets. Tell me who you're picking. Let's get the interaction there. Let's get talking to each other. I also appreciate all the subscriptions to the YouTube channel, all the likes to the videos as well. As always, the support in general, I really appreciate it, guys. I hope you all enjoyed the episode. Thanks for listening. I'm Newsome. We'll see you next week.